All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the All Stats No Res podcast, the premier podcast for the Dominion's 5 multiplayer community. This week's episode, we are talking about Awaken Pretenders. I'm one of your co-hosts, Articulatemis. With me is...
I am HP Munchcraft, another co-host.
I am Soron, another co-host.
And I am Rovsea, the last co-host, and joining for the first time.
And today's episode is going to be Pog or Dog, Awake Pretenders.
Yeah. So just as a disclaimer, even though we're doing this segment for this particular topic, we definitely understand that there's going to be situations where, like, Awaken Pretenders are, they're viable and they're appropriate, but this is in relation to, like, just from a general perspective, in comparison with like dormants and imprisoned. So I'll start. Awaken in comparison to dormant and imprisoned, I gotta go with dog. And I love me some awakes, but for the most part, like 80% of the time, I would not run an awake, and that's why I consider it to be kind of dog.
Alright, well, I don't agree. I think Awakes are fucking Pog.
Of course.
This is kick-ass.
Of course.
Alright, Soron?
I think Awakes are definitely situational on the build. Personally, they're dog for me, but I wouldn't necessarily call Awakes dog in general. I think it's more so preference for each individual build.
I would say that Awake Pretenders, for any nation that you can find, I think almost all of them, an Awake build is going to be as viable as a dormant or imprisoned build, depending upon which build you're looking at. So I'm going to have to go with Pog on this one.
Amazing.
Okay, fair enough. So just to clarify, Soron, you're thinking that it is Pog? The majority of the time, well, you personally as a player would say it's dog, because I almost never see you run awakes.
The only times I'll run awakes are generally in blitzes. I try to avoid them like the plague in a real game.
Okay, so I mean, I think for argument's sake, let's just say that he's on the dog side, since it's that way it'll be like 2v2, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, we got 2 Pogs and 2 dogs.
Yeah, there you go.
Alright.
So I guess I'll start with my point, since I guess I had the strongest opinion about it, I suppose. But I kind of want to mention, like, again, I'll sometimes run awakes. I kind of love, like, different builds and stuff like that. But again, in context and in comparison to dormants and imprisoned, that's why I'm on the dog side, right? And I want to preface this with just looking at exactly what are you getting by having an awake pretender from turn 0. Like, what are you actually giving up? So it's roughly, it's 150 design points, roughly 4 scales, possible blesses, etc. So I don't know if that's actually worth giving up to get that extra 12 turns or to get that initial tempo. I would much actually rather run dormants, and I know HP has the opposite take of me from that, because he's not really much of a dormant player.
Dormant sucks.
But that's kind of where I stand with that, and that's kind of my viewpoint of Awaken. But again, I actually like some Awake builds. I'll run it occasionally. It does have a place in the game, obviously, but in comparison, I wouldn't run it. It's not my go-to. I wouldn't prefer to run it, essentially. So what do you think, HP?
Well, I think Awakes are ultra Pog. I'll give my reasoning. First off, before any goofy shit that I normally engage in, there are, like, proven meta builds that are Awake builds. Like the Vanheim Berserker, or Barkskin build, I should say, is an Awake build. It's a proven meta build. It wrecks shit. So there's, like, already a baseline of, like, builds where the Awake God is, like, basically the build for a nation, or, like, one of the top builds for a nation. But on top of that, you can do the most of build variety and using your resources and doing the most goofy shit with Awakes. So not only have they this baseline of builds that are just basically good, they also have, like, Awake Researchers as an Awake build. You can't do it with anything else. Like, the Awake Incarnates, any sort of Incarnate build is going to be best on an Awake. Like, anything that's using year one, or not anything, but most things that use year one gems are going to be involving an Awake. So, like, you have like a baseline of really good, strong builds. You have tempo builds, and then you also have like your jank that you can do weird builds with Awakes that you just can't do with the other types of Pretender. So that's why I think they're Pog.
So I want to respond to that because it's funny because last week we were on the same side about witch hunters, and I appreciated that. But I would say that yes, first of all, I definitely agree that there are very strong meta builds that rely on awake pretenders, and I'm not discounting those. I think those are good in meta for a reason. But just from the perspective of like general application, I actually disagree. I think that a lot of things like you mentioned, like research or certain types of incarnates, I think it makes actually more sense, especially if the nation can expand on the merit of its own troops. You can actually run dormant and not give that up because you're getting it out by about turn 12. So by the time your first war is happening, you're getting prepped for that anyways, and you're getting the value from all those points for those design points you save for the rest of the game.
I'd like to answer that after one of our other two co-hosts gets their argument in. So, Rob, do you want to go with your opinion?
I will say that, broadly speaking, we should be approaching the topic of Awake by splitting that group within a couple of different categories, right? Because while the big picture effect of an Awake is always going to be tempo, gaining some early advantage in the game before your opponent can gain an advantage. The way that it is done is very different between an Awake expander and an Awake who's there just to mainly hold a bless or to provide research. Right? And I think that particularly this is an important distinction because Awake expanders, while they are probably the best pretender options for some nations, have many more potential pitfalls or more severe pitfalls than just about any other pretender type.
So what I'm hearing is that awake pretenders are kind of dog.
No, I would say that awake pretenders have a design space in which they fit in, and
no, I just mean expanders. I'm sorry, awake expanders is what I meant.
I would disagree with that as well. I would argue that for certain nations, the best build that you can take is an awake expander. As an example, I am pretty well known for playing Joman, and I think that the best build a Joman can take is an Earth Snake. That's the meta Joman build. It's the best one that they have, right? So I think that it's better than that because it goes underwater much quicker, and you get more provinces by the end of year one. It's just the best Joman build, and it has as good of or better scales as well. There are a few downsides, of course. You have a worse bless, but I think that the upsides are overall superior. And while not every nation is going to have the optimal build be an awake expander, some nations probably will. I haven't done as much in-depth expansion testing with other nations as I have with Joman, but I'm pretty confident that there are going to be others who have just as much of a beneficial opening by taking an expander. That being said, if you have selected a build and you were looking for an awake expander, and it turns out that contrary to your expectations, it's not very good at expanding, then given the opportunity cost that you have invested, it is going to be a much more punishing build than a lot of other ones, which may be suboptimal.
I do like Joman as an example. I do think Awake is pretty appropriate for Joman, but I would just look at it just in most nations, like general application. I don't think Awake is typically the best choice. Like for Joman, sure, because they have a lot of gaps that need filling, especially early on. But like, what are some other nations that would take an Awake over anything else?
As an expander, or
an expander specifically, yeah, just staying on the.
As an expander specifically, I could definitely see several nations who don't have a need for a strong bless, such as Shinuyama, Ulm in the Middle Age, or Late Age Man, taking an Awake expander and simply having better expansion.
Wouldn't they have a better option taking a Awake Pretender for other reasons, though, as well? As opposed to expanding? Because some of those have pretty good troop, like LA Man, for instance, can expand on its own pretty well.
Yes, but why would you not want to expand better? You front load your gold income.
Well,
It is as strong
Yeah.
as more scales,
Make forts.
and you secure more land, and it puts you in an advantageous position for your first war.
Well, with dominions, of course, it's, with anything, there's some kind of opportunity cost. So you're kind of giving up a little bit for that as well.
Sure, with Late Age Man, I'll give you an example. You could easily take a Thrice-Worn Boar or an Earth Snake on Late Age Man. You would have a reliable Awake Expander, which is important. Um, let's take the Thrice-Worn Boar as an example. Now, Late Age Man is in a strong position in that it is relatively easy for it to dump drain scales. So let's say that we dump drain scales and heat scales as Late Age Man. That gives you the capability to take regen and hard skin on your pretender, and after you put 4 points into Dominion, you still have 196. I'm sorry, 156 design points. Now, I think you could probably mess around with that and figure out a way to get yourself +4 scales, all told, after the rest of your design decisions are done. Like, you might not actually need hard skin. Fire and shock resistance is probably fine to expand with. Because with the Berserk and the bonus from the Earth magic, you would still have up to 26 protection plus 20 or 10% regen, so you would be perfectly fine with that. And I can take that build with Order 3 Turmoil 3 if I take -2 Misfortune.
You mean
Now,
Prod 3?
does that?
Turmoil
Yeah,
3?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Prod 3 Order 3. That's my mistake.
I don't.
I think that is a perfectly fine build for man.
I feel like we're getting into a little bit of the...
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too lost in the sauce, but I do want to get Soron's take specifically on Awakened Expanders before we return to the general topic. What do you think about Awakened Expanders, Soron?
Okay, so this is going to be in my opinion. Now, some people in the community might not agree with me. Maybe some of you guys don't. I think Awake... So I think Awake is going to be your kind of go-to or easy mode. It might be your first interpretation of maybe what you want to try with a nation. An Awake Expander helps alleviate the learning curve of learning how to expand with your nation. It can be a little bit easier. It's more new player friendly. As you get into the experience side of Dominions, Awake Expanders are much harder to utilize because people know how to kill your expanders. They know what to expect with your gimmicks. So they're less ideal and they're more tempo based, where you have an extra thing that is giving you a province every turn, and that is why you took it. And that thing after expansion phase will hold your globals, and that is your build. You are trying to get an advantage for a temporary period of time in the game to help you win the game. Now, that might be ideal for some people's playstyle. Maybe they like having that advantage, but I think it's very high risk. It requires you as a player to really take advantage of your tempo, and if you don't take advantage of your tempo, you basically have wasted your design points. So I think it's not very forgiving of a build, honestly. And
would you say that it's a bit of a crutch? Maybe you're giving up too much to get that initial advantage?
Yeah, I think if you're playing Dominions and the first thing, I'm a mentor in Immersion, right? The first thing I'll always tell every player is you should really figure out how you're going to expand with your nation. And if you're struggling, ask for help and go from there. Because almost every nation in the game, despite what people think, can expand. Now, it's not going to be the most obvious. It might be a little bit gimmicky, but almost all nations in the game can expand. It's funny you guys brought up LA Man because it's a commonly asked nation of how do you expand with this nation without an expander. And it's a little bit tricky at first, right? But the expander really for nations like LA Man are to help you get that cap circle faster. And then once you get that cap circle to pump out your expanders, it's all of a sudden super easy. But it's just that period of not having your cap circle, which really people struggle with. So, to me, it's like the whole conversation really evaluates to people really like Awakes because a lot of them might not play.
Yeah, it makes the game easier. I just want to interject and say, really appreciate that take. Can always rely on Soron for the more elitist takes. But, but I agree with it.
Yeah. I have not heard a non-elitist take yet here.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Maybe Rob's a bit more populist than the rest.
Like if you want me to give a real elitist take, I think like certain builds like that are strong in the meta only exist because people don't know how to deal with them, especially early. You guys or HP brought up Abyssea's Barkskin Blood Bond meta Vanheim build. There's a way to kill that early game. Most people don't know. Same with Vanheim, Abyssea, all these like really strong ones. People just don't know how to kill it. Very doable. You might not be able to do it if it's your first war, if someone literally runs at you and cripples themselves. But that still ties into my opinion of like Awakes being dog. Like Awakes are going to be your Hellblessed, Hellblesses too, and I don't think killing 2 players, even if you kill 2, is enough for if you're full torch scales. I don't think it's worth it.
You can certainly rewards, but not the game. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll have a hell of a time, and people will be real mad, but it's very hard to deal with like your 3rd or 4th player, especially when you're that crippled, in my opinion.
I have not found that to be the case.
Well, it depends whom you're playing against. Very much matters. Sometimes you can roll lobbies, and then people, they champion this build for a while, and then it's another lobby, and it's like, wow, this guy just died. But that was the big surge with Ashtod for so many years. People thought they were overpowered with the Fortitude, Blood Bond regen. Of course, Ilwinter over nerfs the build. For some reason they targeted Fortitude when regen should have been targeted, and then kind of fell out of favor after that. It's still a very strong build.
I don't think regen should have been targeted. Region's a little bit underpowered at the moment, in my opinion.
Old forgotten player Blokes would disagree.
I would say regen is probably the most viable Incarnate bless in the game at the moment.
I think Fortitude is a little more niche, and maybe regen should have been whacked. But Ilwinter is not the best at balancing. I love their game, but their balance is very questionable.
If I might interject, I would argue that the one topic here that we have all agreed on so far is the purpose of an Awake, particularly an Awake Expander, which is what we've been discussing a lot so far. I would say that...
Well, we haven't even touched all of the Awakes, to be honest.
That's true, but we've all agreed that an Awake Expander gives you tempo, that it speeds up your expansion, it increases the capability to recruit additional expansion parts.
That's the goal of it.
Yeah.
That is the goal.
Yeah. Presuming you do not kill your expander, it's really good. But when you run, there are players who will run
an Earth Snake in expansion in a real game.
I am fucking assuming like minimal levels of competence here. I know you can't always do that with Dominions players, but I think when we're like talking about what's good, you can't just assume people are bad.
Well, like a common mistake with Awakes is, running into Unblessed or No Dominion into Barbs or Bone Tribe.
Those are such common mistakes, though, that you can easily avoid them.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, but a lot of players win.
But you could say like the same with Imprisoned, that
Yeah, like you accidentally didn't blast half of your sacreds and you ran into Barbs and then you fail expand. Right? That's a valid criticism of any expansion strategy.
It's just more punishing on Awake versus any of the other options.
No.
Yeah, because you're committing.
I would say losing an expansion party is worse on a full scales build early in the game.
No,
I would I would disagree. I would disagree.
Now, one thing I will say that this discussion brought me to that I think is very, very interesting is with Awakes, you get a lot of benefit as a noob very early, very easy from them. And then in my opinion, you get a lot of benefit as you are a really good player. You get to take advantage more of tempo, and the dead zone of Awakes is the kind of middling player that does not get a lot out of them. Because if you are good enough to expand with scales, but you're not at a point where you can really know the game well enough to like take advantage of tempo and know when to do timing pushes, that's when awakes give you the fewest benefit. And I think that's kind of why a lot of the community thinks they're dog, is because there's that dead zone where it's like, yeah, I'm not a noob, I don't need an earth snake to expand, but like you're not thinking in terms of, well, what if I have more provinces early, fight my first war, well, start my forts earlier so that I can fight my first war earlier, and then eventually I start putting up globals with the thing, which I'm arriving at earlier because I have this larger empire, and things like that.
That's a fair
Also,
assumption.
It's just that period of actually utilizing that time. It's not good for new players and even veteran players of the game. There's individuals in the community who do not make use of that time, and they would have been better off taking a different build and even having less provinces, because they're not making use of their advantage, so it's wasted.
If you're relying on it as a crutch too much, I think it hinders your development a little bit. And I guess the other major question on Awake Expander specifically is like, how much scaling are you giving up to get that tempo? And like, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on yourself to really do well in the early game.
Well,
Yeah.
I take that 3, but like, I think that pressure is a little bit fake, and I think that's related to tilt. It's something that you need to give up to become a good player, because it's like you need to do better earlier if you take an awake, or if you take an aggressive build or a tempo build of any kind. Yeah, you'll need to do earlier, but you don't actually need to go war into war into war into war into war. You still want to consolidate like a normal player does, but you want to just do the first war faster, and then consolidate, and then do the second war faster. But some of the time, you can take a war or two, or a war and a half, or a war and some vulturing, and you can say, all right, well, I just did this. I have this big, stupid, idiot monster sitting around. I have a bunch of troops because I just took down somebody early, and I have a bunch of forts. But, I've obviously overextended my empire and don't have all that much research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit and research to lanterns, because I can scale my research more than anyone else because I have more land. And instead of scaling with scales, you scale with scale up to tech up to lanterns, or you scale with your blood economy, or you scale with any of the other ways the game has of scaling that aren't represented by your scales themselves.
That's fair. Let me just clarify real quick what I mean by pressure, because Dominions is a very chaotic game. You never know what's going to happen. What I'm saying is like the pressure of not making a mistake and like losing your Awake Expander. That's a real material loss on the field that does hamper yours if you didn't take it. You know what I mean? So just to clarify.
I'm going to have to disagree. I don't think taking an Awake Expander puts you under any particular pressure.
I think it does if you lose it. If you lose it absolutely
sure,
does.
But I mean, that's like saying you lose a giant stack of sacreds with a build where you heavily invest in sacreds.
But that's less likely to happen than it is with an Awake.
How often have you tried expanding with Awakes? Because I have. When I take an Awake Expander into a game,
I've seen countless
I don't think
monsters.
I've ever lost one to Independence.
I've definitely seen monsters die in bumps with other people's sacreds, even small groups. I have had Knights of the Chalice, like a group of 8, kill an Earth Snake. Random bump. I didn't know he was going there. Like,
I've never had that happen.
I've definitely killed other people's awake monsters walking around.
There's definitely ways.
It does happen.
Yeah, bumping monsters into sacreds is a way they die, and you can make bad attacks with monsters, and you can overestimate your monster on the defense. Like if you're using them for a pick and roll, which is I like pick and rolls. I really like oh, okay, I'm gonna base race you. You're gonna come at my cap. I'm gonna come at your cap, but I have some card or whatever, or
Yeah.
I'm End, I have Sacred PD or whatever. I pick. I like it, but if you make a bad call on your pick and roll, then your pick just flops and you flop. So I
Absolutely.
understand that point.
And just as a disclaimer, even though this is about vanilla Dominions 5, this podcast in general, I will say to make Awake Expanders a little bit more viable, I wish they did. Illwinter did what DE does, which is to
I
give
don't.
recuperation on every monster chassis.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
I think that would make it a lot more viable because on something that's not like an Earth Snake or something with recuperation, getting diseased or having afflictions, even if it doesn't die, kind of can stop it in its tracks as well. So
Yeah.
I think that kind of takes away from some of the value.
And we've only touched on. I want to point this out because someone in the comments will probably mention this. Like there are Awake like Titans or SE setups you can do, but they're a little more uncommon. I know players like Sai might run something like that. Those exist as well, but they're more unique to see, I would say, versus an average player.
I think
Those are much harder to kill, but they
they're
do
harder
exist.
to run. Yeah, they're harder to run.
They're also harder to run. That's true.
I think
They're different.
I think the player named Gaydad runs Awake Titans with Death 3 all the time. So there's
Zan has also
yeah.
Yeah,
made
Zan's
some
a big
videos on Awake expanders for Titans.
Let's talk some
Which
other
I don't agree.
Let's talk
too
some
much
other
on.
Awake builds, though. We have the old, rarely ever used anymore Awake Researcher, and the
Well, I wouldn't say it's rare.
I haven't
would.
seen one in a long time.
I've seen them in the Menti threads, especially from mentors. But
Okay.
I would say Awake researchers nowadays, the most common ones are going to be byproducts of taking some other bless.
Mhm.
Right, like the purpose of the build is at least twofold to
Right.
have a bless early as well as a researcher.
And
I mean,
really,
it's uncommon.
if you're taking an Awake, you really do want to have your build be as multi-role as possible. I think.
Oh yeah, you have to.
The old or not the old. I think Ruby's turtle, like his builds. A was one of the top players on Ruby. I know nobody listening to this has ever heard of Ruby or played on Ruby or whatever, but his builds were always Awake Expander with an Incarnate that's somehow relevant to your Sacreds and a path that is relevant for a global. And that was his build template. How he won games was he would just expand for the good tempo, have a relevant-ish bless on his sacred so he could attack people in a quick year one war after he had put up his forts early, and then later on cast Earthblood Deepwell and run that to victory or whatever. But yeah, I think any Awake build you want to be very multi-role.
I just think that a lot of the other builds you could do instead of Awake are generally, in my opinion, if not better at expanding, stronger than the Awake builds. And that's sincerely what I believe.
I heavily disagree.
I think stats, heavy stats will beat a monster build. Even if they have the tempo, you're not going to hold those provinces. You're going to get ran over.
Depends upon who you're fighting.
Well, if you got someone with big stats and you're walking on a monster player, kill their monster, and all of a sudden their land is free. But
I think you can put that caveat on any discussion that we really have, but just assuming that players are of equal skill, you know what I mean?
I would argue that you yourself have argued against that point before, Soron.
Uh-oh.
Let's say we're playing a nation, I don't know, Mictlan, against an Awake Expander, and I put stats on my Mictlan, and the Awake Expander nation makes short bows. Who would win that fight?
Yeah, well,
that's
I think the mistake is already made when you're taking heavy stats on uniquely Mictlans.
Yeah.
A sacred nation, one might argue.
Listen,
uniquely suited to taking stats.
I don't think they're the best ones to run stats on, honestly.
Yeah, when I hear stats, I don't think of Mictlan.
I'd honestly say Mictlan is one where I would want an Awake with Incarnates on it. Because
yeah, I would probably want a dormant build over Awake.
Those troops are I like Awake. I value the tempo and the heavy expansion, but like with Mictlan, I think your guys are so generally they die to short bows, and that's a real big problem. Incarnates can fix that, and stats can't.
That's one of my spicy takes. My endless hatred of Mictlan being rated anything powerful, but most people will disagree with me.
I think you've done
including me. But let's move away from that part there. I think that I would say that part of the idea about getting greater tempo is to access the sort of tools, including magic tools, that you would need to counter a stats build earlier. That would be a counter argument for, well, stats can kill a monster, therefore it beats an Awake build.
I think it's still easier for the stats player to navigate versus the Awake player who has a monster. Specifically, monsters, I feel like, are the weakest form, but they have the greatest tempo. That's my personal opinion on the matter. I think the stats player just has more versatility, more ways to play it, and the Awake player has less options despite the gold advantage.
I think you're getting just more overall value, right?
Well, it's harder to... The blesses are not balanced in Dominions, and so it can be hard depending on what is there, depending on the situation. It always depends. How much you need to catch up to counter something, to kill something. And generally a monster is only giving you utility through its body and through its path access. And sometimes the bless can be relevant, but it's not as versatile. Like, it's not going to give like a really big boon to your sacreds where you can use them in a variety of ways. So I think it's harder to play.
I think you may be underestimating Incarnates just a little bit. Because
Incarnates, I'm not saying they're shit. I'm just saying, like, with monsters, it's hard to take multiple Incarnates with a monster.
Right. You get like two basically. You get one.
Yeah, like even Regen and Regen Hardskin can be a lot of whatever, in my opinion. Like maybe on a giant nation, you could argue like, oh, it's easy to get that value, but giants have a lot more problems than just that.
I'd just say that, like, hey, if you're taking a monster, you're like taking it anyway, and something like Regen Hardskin, even if you put it on some absolute dork who's not taking full advantage of it, you know, it's still better than the dork without those things, you know, like, you still want to make your sacreds even if they'll bless mediocre or whatever, because a guy with like a bunch of prot and regen is still a better fighter. And will buff up better than just like a dude.
Yes and no. I think it really depends per situation. Like, let's go back to Rovsea's example of LA Man. If you had Hardskin and Regen on the Wardens, I don't think you still make them in LA.
I'd still fucking make them.
Like maybe you would, but I don't think it's a good choice.
I would argue that's the only reason you would make them an LA. If you had some kind of incarnate bless on them to make them usable.
I think you could put stats on them if you really wanted to.
Yeah, I think stats would probably be better, or something else. But like Regen Hardskin, like on that chassis, is not worth it.
I mean, they have this is from memory, but they have like what 18, 19 armor prot.
They have 18 prot.
They do have 18.
If they have Regen and Hardskin, then they're very hard for like indies and PD, and they get better at rating, which is something you want to have.
Well, they get better at rating,
right? So just do
it. Man needs stuff to be more killy. I feel like because they have other things to hold the line.
Really, hypothetically, without knowing the specifics, and I doubt anyone knows here, is like, does that incarnate push them over the edge of giving them uses versus certain thresholds? And if the answer is yes, then it is useful. If the answer is no and they still need help, then that bless effectively is not working.
Well said.
All right.
All right, why don't we move on to the next segment, which is how does it work? So we've already kind of given a few examples, but what are some of our favorite Awake builds?
I'm gonna cheat and steal this from HP, so he can't use it. The most meta
damn it.
Awake cancer you can take. You're playing EA. You want to roll your face across that keyboard. You take Blood Bond, Bark Skin. Maybe you take some Resist, and I would recommend stats, but you just go to town and start making red arrows.
Whoa, you can't say that word in this podcast. This is all stats, no res. You can't be saying take res.
Hey, if you really want to like run some normie brain dead, I shouldn't say normie. If you want to run a brain dead build,
elitist takes here. Love it.
Hell yeah.
That wasn't intentional.
It's fine.
The elitism is just leaking through.
No,
it's fine. I think you should own the brand, Soron. All right, so HP, he might have taken yours, but what's some of your favorite Awake?
God, oh man, there's a lot to choose from.
The Hellblast?
I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna cheat off his cheating and say, in preparation for a game that some of us are in, I've been testing M.A. Abyssea, what is it? The lion, the golden lion, I think. The guy who's got fire nature paths, an awake monster with bark skin on it, and about 9 dom. So you get about 1 million burning ones with bark skin, and you also get a monster, and you have Abyssea's starting army. So you basically just take 1 billion provinces for very low effort.
Nice.
So
out of curiosity, what do you take the fire? Like, what plus do you take with the fire?
Oh, I haven't decided. It's either fire shield or awe.
Okay, nice.
Awe is probably better, but I'm not sure.
Right. As for myself, I'm a big Great Sage stan, so I love my Awake research.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, not to get too off of topic, I found that with a little bit of testing, I actually prefer it on dormant. Believe it or not, I don't feel like you're giving up that much torment. I feel like I get a lot more value. So that's part of the reason why I kind of took Dog, is because aside from expanders, I think a lot of the Awake builds, I feel like they'd be better on dormant, to be honest. But I know you don't like dormant.
If you,
what's that?
Well,
if you really hate someone, just torture scales.
Exactly.
Find them on the map, run it down. You might get banned. You can do it. You should probably go
top level tips.
Honorable mention to the Bogaris Lenormand cancer.
Is this a reference to invite only now? Is that what we've come to?
Oh, I don't know that was what he meant, but I just know that you could take.
I don't actually recommend
or not even the Lenormand. You could take the dwarf that turns into the Lenormand as Bogaris and time your research so that you get the effect of a great sage and also the most of the effect of an awake expander, and all it costs you is dumping that death down into the fucking pits.
Oh man.
Oh, one of my favorite Awake chassis, just a quick honorable mention. I actually really like the Ormir.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The snake with fear and reason. So.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. The worm is good. Twice horn boar. What are all the good monsters? Biggest Pigus. Oh, that's Thorshorn. The bulls aren't bad. I've used the fire dragon.
Before we blow all of
the
them.
fire. Okay, let's be clear. We can't call the fire dragon good. Nobody will take us seriously.
Fire dragon is pretty.
Well, I didn't say it was good, but I said it was usable.
That's true. You can take awe.
So Rob,
yeah, that's
what is your favorite Awake build?
What is my favorite Awake build? Well, I'm glad you asked, HP. Aside from the obvious, which I've already mentioned, one of my favorite builds is you take Late Age Pythium, right?
Yeah.
And you take the Netherite of Many Names, and You make some foreign recruit mages, and then you walk them back to your capital where they get +5 research from the scales and the netherite.
That sounds
Another research build, yeah.
That's funny. See, you can't.
It's gonna take some. It's gonna take a while to get some value out of that, though.
You can't do this kind of thing with dormants.
I would.
I mean,
argue
you can.
You probably can do that
By
one
the
with
time
a
your first
dormant,
capital's out, you know.
but you don't get your other researchers quickly. Because the netherite of many names has just innately high research skill
I mean,
as well.
to be fair, we're not giving enough credit to the tempo of Awake Researcher. Hitting your point buffs and running at someone can be very hard to deal with. Turn year 0, but it's also exceptionally hard to play.
Yes, it's very expensive too.
It's very expensive. It's very hard to play. It's very powerful. You have 0 bless, but you are throwing magic at the opponent. I think Blokes was onto something, but I feel like I'm gonna be a little. I guess I'm leaning into this elitist crap. Dominions players are very lazy, so they're not
first.
Just take the simple builds. We got the Soron special.
Well, I would argue that committing to point buff strategy like that has some very obvious downsides.
high
which
risk, high reward.
is that you're committing many mages. So even if you win, by the time you win, you are probably behind in research.
Not as Bagras. You're never behind his research.
It's true. It does work on some nations, particularly in the late age, I will say, where astral for point buffing is more common and you have a lot of more efficient research mages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a strategy that could have more discovery, honestly, and it could have some interesting timings. I don't feel like, if I'm being honest, I feel like parts of the community aren't at the point of like kind of discovering these things. People still highly value crossbows, especially, and I think this is like a solved thing. It's been solved, but people keep on championing them. It's kind of weird that we're in 2023. I feel like the meta's moved a lot, but people still think like crossbow meta is a thing when there's lots of obvious counters to them, for example.
Right.
So there's a lot of potential, I think, for strategies, but I don't think the community is at that point.
So we'll just keep pushing the meta until it gets there.
Sure.
I do have one last honorable mention. I don't mean to break up the breakup, but I did forget to mention. God, I wish I remember the exact build, but it was another Ruby user, my dad, not Gay Dad from Lucid's Farms, my dad. He used a expander researcher hybrid bitch queen on MA Alm and made use of the early gems. Yeah, I know. I wish I remember the build because I'm going to sound like a liar if you hadn't seen it in action. But he got a bunch of extra early research. He got a bunch of extra provinces, and then he was just in nature and death because he took like some rainbow paths on it and got a bunch of stuff all needs and doesn't normally get, and it was really good for him.
I mean, if you have any build that is very tailored out and you know it works, like at least for the early parts of the game, that build might be powerful. And I'm not discrediting anything that exists in any specific space. I'm just speaking generally. I might sound or come across that I think that they're shit. I just think they're very hard to play, and I wouldn't recommend them to new players. That's generally where my opinion stems from. But I'm not discrediting the potential or ability of any of these builds. I just personally wouldn't play them because they're very stressful, and I wouldn't recommend others because I don't think they're going to make use of that tempo.
It's very fair. There's still a lot of space in the game for a lot of untapped creativity, so I do enjoy that as well. So some stuff like what HP mentioned with that build, I wouldn't.
Yeah, that's the great thing about Dominions is, it might seem like you're looking for needles in haystacks, but every once in a while you'll meet a player that opens your eyes and does some crazy things, and then you know what you do? You find all the really cool players and you shove them into a game together, and you get a great experience.
Yeah,
that's great. And that's a perfect time to kind of wrap up that segment. So, all right, and that's it for this week's episode of All Stats No Res. Join us next week when we talk about the Evocation Spell School.